Hello and welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We are here for George Wagner IV murder trial analysis. So we have one day to go over, which would have been this past Monday, and then we're going to combine a couple of days and go over the wiretaps. And y'all, I never in a million years thought that I would say that Jake Wagner is the sane one in this family, but he is. All right, so this was from Monday. We did have the prosecution testify, having witnesses. And then for a small part of the day, we started the defense's case because they were scheduled to have witnesses that were flying in on Monday. But because of the delay on Friday over the wiretaps, the prosecution did not wrap up on Friday like they thought they would. So a little mixed up, but we're going to just go with it. First up, we got to talk about the Boondock Saints. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with the movie. It's been a solid 10 years since I've seen it. I didn't think it was that good. I mean, it was good, but it wasn't, just like incredible or anything. So, Angela Canepa basically spent a good portion of the morning drawing parallels between the brothers, the family, the crimes, and the movies in the Boondock Saints. I think there's only two. So the Boondock Saints franchise. Ryan Chatterer was on the stand again. He showed jurors photos of Billy Wagner's hand where he had a scorpion tattoo. Ryan said that a character in the films has a tattoo on his trigger finger in a spot similar to where Billy has his scorpion tattoo. Seems like a stretch, but all right. He, being Ryan Chatterer, also said the movie characters discuss a fable involving a scorpion killing a frog. That must have been a minor point in the movie because I don't really remember that either. Ryan Chatterer also points out that the father of the brothers in the movie, so the father of the characters played by Norman Reedus and the other dude, their father in the movie killed his best friend. He murders his best friend. And then Ryan reminded the jurors that Billy had considered Chris his best friend, Chris Sr. his best friend, and had acknowledged that he had come out of the house. Jake testified to it, and then I think somebody else testified to the fact that he came out of the house screaming that I just shot my best friend, whatever. So there's that. They painted the brothers as vigilante brothers who murdered people who deserved to die. They had ski masks and guns like the brothers in the movie. Head to part 2. George Wagner trial from this past Monday, part 2. So now that we got that stupid shit out of the way, the defense team objected obviously several times about the whole drawing parallels between the Boondock Saints shit. Because, why wouldn't they? And at this point, we did hear from the first of the defense witnesses. This was a tattoo artist that had flown in, so I assume he's from Alaska or something. His name was Sean Fisher, and he said that he gave Billy his scorpion tattoo, and he also gave Jake and George tattoos. Fisher then went and pretty quickly discredited the prosecution's theory that Jake had a commemorative tattoo on his shoulder with the skull and the 8-ball. Fisher said that was a design that was made up in his head, that it was a pretty common design, with the 8-ball, a skull, and dead man's hand. And honestly, I've seen all elements of that tattoo multiple times. But he said that he came up with George's tattoo himself because he was covering up an old tattoo that George had of a diesel company logo. Why you would do that without being paid to put a logo on your body, I don't fucking know, but I mean, whatever. Everybody with a Browning tattoo is just like, what? Right now. So, Sean testified that skulls, playing cards, and 8-balls were his go-to designs if the client didn't have their own ideas. And he also said Jake and George did not come together to get their tattoos. They came to separate, well, I guess Jake, George, and Billy, that they came at separate appointments. The defense called a couple of the pastors from the church in Alaska. First was Caleb Sinereski. He said, quote, "It was a lot of media attention and stuff, and George was concerned about what the negative effects it would have on me personally. and the church, and he didn't want to cause any further harm with him being there, so he didn't want to come in. So basically, they were trying to show that George had more concern for others than himself, which is complete bullshit. Kelly Cinereski, who is Caleb's father and another pastor, said, in short, George was smart and Jake struggled. Kelly Cinereski also said that George was more independent. He is corroborating what the defense is saying, that George is his own person and was trying to distance himself from his family, and they wanted to escape their lifestyle. That is all for that day, because I am not going into great detail about the Boondock Saints, because that's kind of stupid. But that being said, I do absolutely think that in Jake's head, he was getting off on the fact that he was living a real life Boondock Saints moment and killing people that he thought deserved it. So whatever. Go to the next part. We're going to get into the wiretaps. George Wagner trial. This was the stuff from this past Tuesday. Not a whole lot. We did some cross-examination of Ryan Scheider about the false truck bed. We'll go through the questions that he was asked, and then they ended up, seriously, they ultimately ended up dismissing court early this day because there were issues surrounding the wiretaps and the transcripts of which. This one's going to be a lot of back and forth because there was a lot of, he was on cross-examination this day, but then there was redirect and recross and etc. So John Parker started the cross-examination by asking Ryan Scheider about the false truck bed that was constructed in the pickup truck that was used the night of the murders. Scheider said the construction of the false bed was based on given testimony by Jake, and that there were photographs shown of this the day before. In the photos, 2 BCI agents larger than both Jake and George were depicted lying in the bed of the truck beneath the false bed crafted from plywood and 2x4s. Parker asked Scheider when this took place, and he said that they reconstructed this and the reenactment took place after Jake's confession. The following series of questions John Parker asked to Ryan Scheider, all of these, Scheider said no or no, it had not. Did the reenactment involve the agents lying under the false bed for up to 20 to 40 minutes? Were the agents in the bed with the back closed while the truck was running? Did Scheider check to see if the exhaust from the truck leaked into the bed under those circumstances? Did he place bales of hay or straw atop the boards to see how the false bed bore their weight? And did they drive the truck around with those bales of hay to see if any of them fell out? Then, of course, he was asking him about the Boondock Saints movie and its sequel, All Saints Day, pointing out that there are many details that didn't match the content. In the movie, they use a 9mm Beretta that was never used in the Rodin murders. But on redirect, Angela Canepa pointed out that originally a Beretta was intended to be used, but it was severely damaged. The barrel was severely damaged when Jake test fired it with a homemade silencer that he made from the flashlight. A couple weeks ago, when we went over this, they did post a picture of the flashlight that they recovered, and it was heavily damaged. Parker went through the entire plot of the first movie, and then when he moved on to asking about the plot of Boondock Saints 2, Ryan Scheider aside, and said there were many details that didn't match the Rodin murders. Head to part 3. George Wagner, the fourth trial, days from November 7th and 8th. This is part 4. Yes, this is part 4. The last one was part 3. I said head to part 3. I meant part 4 because I decided halfway through this to combine them all. Parker went over the warrants for the wiretaps. There was, Parker pointed out that among the documents, there were provocative acts were listed as having been performed by the investigators. Scheider said those are things agents did while listening in on the bugs planted around the Wagners in the hopes that these actions would spark important conversation. Parker said you were trying to get them to say something, and Scheider said, yes, we want them to discuss things for the investigation. I'm sorry, I have the hiccups. One of the things that they did was file a subpoena to bring Jake and George's grandmother, Rita Newcomb, in for a handwriting sample, and the various search warrants executed on different Wagner-owned properties. John Parker asked if that was sneaky, but the prosecution objected. Ryan Scheider stressed that these kinds of actions are standard when listening devices are placed in an investigation, and that would make sense because obviously you would want to try to bait him into talking about something. During redirect, we're still on these movies. Canepa pointed out that in the Boondock Saints 2, the main character's father uses a Glock handgun to shoot his best friend at point blank range, and that those bodies were all that body was, or I guess bodies plural, I don't know, were dragged in the movies, like at Chris Senior's house. She also asked if some of the actions taken place while they were listening to the Wagners were things that the investigators were going to do anyway, and he said yes, which honestly makes sense because, of course, they would subpoena the grandmother for a handwriting sample if they thought that a document was forged. Randy Deering, at this point, after Scheider stepped down, took the time to advise the jury that the testimony they heard about the movies should be weighed carefully by the jurors themselves, who should determine whether they've heard enough evidence to determine the relevancy of the fictional plots to the details of the actual case. They took a real lengthy lunch break, and then they came back and argued for 2 hours about the contents of the wiretap recordings, and that the prosecution was going to play. Parker argued that many of them the prosecution sought to play held little or no probative value to the trial. Deering then went through the transcripts item by item. Parker and Nash informed him to which recordings they objected. They argued their sides until Deering ruled on whether he felt the item had value or not. In the end, several of the recordings were thrown out, but most of the recordings were still played. They also argued that the recordings were hard to hear, which they are. At the end of that day, head over to the 9th.